Hello everyone, thanks for joining the In the Cloud Security Summit. I'm very pleased to be here today as your speaker and talking about a very important subject. My name is Yuri Diogenes. I'm a Principal Program Manager for Microsoft Azure Security Center and Azure Defender. And in today's topic, I want to talk about the importance of threat detections built for cloud workloads. This is a very important subject nowadays. But before diving into this, I want to bring awareness about something that is also truly important, which is secure hygiene. And we start always talking about secure hygiene as your number one priority. And the reason for that is because threat actors are constantly utilizing known vulnerabilities, misconfigurations to be able to get into your system. One thing that we noticed during the beginning of the pandemic in 2020 is that threat actors were leveraging current infrastructure that were dormant for some time, and they were monitoring current things that were happening across the globe. When the pandemic hit, they start to see an opportunity to build exploit kit and start new campaigns that were leveraging that subject. As you can see on this diagram that we released at the Microsoft Defense Digital Report in September 2020, we noticed this uptick in March 2020, exactly when the world was thinking about what this pandemic was. Threat actors were creating crafted emails, spear phishing emails, to be able to establish the initial foothold into customers' environment. And the reason for that is because they were leveraging something that is very common, social engineering. As much as you have secure controls in place, different types of program software and policies in place, at the end of the day, the end user has the capability to click on that link. That's why it's so important that you have a very strong security awareness training in place to avoid this type of scenario as well. Now, during this time, we noticed that these threat actors were not really doing something extremely sophisticated. They were basically exploiting misconfiguration on the system. And if you look to the news, the main point is misconfiguration. And that's because when customers are in this journey to the cloud, they really do not pay too much attention on the amount of workloads that they are migrating to the cloud, the different threat vectors that each one of those workloads has, and they start to using old methods to protect current workloads, which is really not applicable. That's point number one. Point number two, cloud by nature is very agile. So different teams will start to provisioning new resources. If you don't have visibility across all your workloads, chances are you will not even know that there is a new workload active in place. How do you manage the secure hygiene of that new workload? So that's an important point. And this is something that we've seen this warning across different venues. Even the Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency in the United States released this report in January 2021 talking about this. And I'm going to highlight this main paragraph. Threat actors are using phishing and other vectors to exploit poor cyber hygiene practice within victims' cloud services configuration. So again, the first thing you need to do is the homework to ensure that you have strong secure hygiene. That's number one. And when you go to this direction, you are doing your proactive work. You are ensuring that you have enough controls in place to even reduce the likelihood that a threat actor will be able to exploit a known vulnerability. Now, you need to incorporate some very important principles. When we're talking about those principles, we are talking about things like zero trust principles. which are around verify explicitly, least privilege, and assume breach. When we talk about verify, we are talking about always verify. It doesn't really matter if the user is authenticated already on his computer. If he is accessing a resource, you need to authenticate again. If the user is traveling to a different location, you may have a different policy for when the user is located in a different country, for example, because the chances to be exploit from his mobile device or his laptop in a different location is higher. So you want to ensure that you have location-based policies in place. So you always have to trust by verify. You always have to ensure that you have authentication that takes in consideration the scenario, not only username and password. That's really an old approach. You need to move forward and have a more dynamic approach for that. Always leveraging the concept of least privilege, of course. This is very important, but we are going one level above the normal least privilege. We are talking about ensure that users are not able to access resources when it's not really necessary, or resources are not available when users really don't need. One classic example is machines that you provisioning and you widely open for management on the internet via port 22 for Linux machines or via 3389 for Windows machines. Why leaving a machine widely open on the internet from those ports? And when I say widely open is because the number one attack in infrastructure as a service VMs is really brute force attack. When you don't have visibility about who is trying to attack your environment, you really don't know that a brute force attack is happening on the RDP level, for example, remote desktop. And the question is, first, why that machine is widely available for everyone at any time, and why not use the concept of least privilege? In other words, just allow access when it is necessary. Not just enough access, but also just in time access, which means make that machine available to be accessible only when users really need, which means that they needed to request access, establish a timeline, and then access that machine. That's very, very important. They need that. You need to incorporate this. The other thing is assume breach. That's another important principle that you must be aware. You cannot think that you will never be compromised, because what happens is if you don't have a plan to respond to an incident, the damage will be much higher. So by using the concept of assuming breach, what you're saying is, look, we may get compromised, but we are going to respond fast. We are going to identify, to detect, and take an action as quick as possible because we have a plan. We have threat detections in place for each workload. And as soon as we receive an alert, we have a plan to respond and to remediate that threat, to avoid the threat to do more damage. Because if you are able to identify a threat actor right in the beginning of his attack, for example, when he is doing the initial reconnaissance or when he is trying to do any sort of discovery on the network, chances are that no damage was really done on the network yet. So you're going to be able to identify the attacker and take an action to expel that attacker or to at least isolate the environment to not cause more damage. So it's very important to have a plan in place. But you only have a plan if you use the concept of assume breach. In other words, we may get compromised, but we're going to have a response in place. We're going to have detections, and we are going to act quickly to contain that threat. Very important. Now, we need to look at this in a holistic manner, which means that to enhance the security posture, we need to invest in three major areas: protection, detection, and response. This is really what secure posture means. The proactive work that you do to improve your secure hygiene, the reactive work that you do to detect threats, and the response. Ideally, we want to reduce the time between the detection and the response. The problem is that majority of the time, the companies, they are not investing too much in protection, so now they have to play catch up with detection and response. So you need to ensure that you have equally distribution of resources across those three major pillars. You have to do your homework from the protection perspective, but also detection and response. So that's the secure posture. And when we say threat detections built for cloud workloads, what we are really talking about is the attackers. They are not really looking only to attack a VM anymore. They are looking for cloud workloads. How can I go after a cloud workload and obtain the information that I need? Look at this number. Cybersecurity, the number of files exposed on a misconfigured server's storage and cloud service has risen to 2.3 billion. And this is a new article from 2021. So that's very alarming situation, because you don't have visibility and you don't have threat detection that were built for those scenarios. Each cloud workload has its own threat vector. You need to understand how threat actors are trying to hack into those workloads. And you need to have threat detection that is able to identify those scenarios. Okay? One of the examples is the crypto mining attack hit by Kubeflow. We identified this. We have threat detection for that using Azure Defender for Kubernetes. And for that reason, we ensure that our threat detection is based on different phases of the cyber kill chain. We want to ensure first that each workload has its own threat detections that were built by security researchers that were looking to specific scenarios for each workload, and that the threat detection is built thinking of the timeline of the attack. The ideal scenario is that you are able to see attackers right in the beginning of the campaign. For example, the target and attack phase of the attack. Or you can also have threat detections on the installation exploitation on post-breach. Anyway, you need to have threat detection built specifically for the workload, and that those threat detections are able to identify each phase of the attack. That will give you a chance to have different levels of response that are based on the phase in which the threat actor is acting at that point on when you see the alert. So this is the entire scope of threat detections that Azure Defender has. As you can see, the threat detections are not only for IIS VMs, but for PaaS as well. As a matter of fact, most of the threat detections are for PaaS, because PaaS are really the future for many cloud workloads. And each one of those PaaS services has its own threat vectors. And different attackers will try to exploit those cloud workloads, PaaS workloads. So Azure Defender has different plans that covers different PaaS services recently, including the Azure Defender for Resource Manager and Azure Defender for DNS. So this is the two powerful threat detections that we will look directly into the Azure Resource Manager layer and trigger alerts that are specific for that scenario. Same thing for Azure for DNS. So with that, I want to ensure that you have some time to reflect about the importance of threat detections built for workloads. You can start this journey by enable Azure Security Center for free. It's a completely free solution that will give you the visibility across different workloads. You're going to receive secure recommendations, and you're going to have a secure score in which you are going to work all your way to 100%. which is the ideal security score, which means you address all the security recommendations that are possible at that point. And then you'll be able to upgrade to Azure Defender and do a trial for 30 days. Give it a try. We have a series of articles that were released recently that allows you to test it out, the solution, and you have 30 days to decide if you want to keep it or not. But it's important for you to have a proof of concept for each one of those plans and then go after and see which ones are important for your environment. Thank you very much for your time. Here are some links that you can visit, and I hope you enjoyed the event.